Okay, today we're going to start on Lamed Zayin Amid Beis. Towards the bottom. Elameyata, Lataita face, Lataita face, Lataita face. It's 6-7 lines from the bottom. It's 37b. Thank Hashem that you're able to learn Torah every day. Specific learning, we should have the base of Migdash immediately. And also learning for Shlema for Rabbi needs. And Yankel. Yankel, is okay. Okay. What we learned before was there's a machlekes Beishami and Beis Hillel. How many matanis, how many applications of blood are essential in the korban chatas? Beishami said 2. Beis Hillel said 1. By all korbanos, everyone agreed that it was 1. 1 application of blood was essential. The question was by the korban chatas. Korban chatas was a little different. So it says that by the korban chatas, what was the source? Rav Huna tells us the source for Beishami. It says kronis, which is a plural. Kronis, corners, kronis. So we said that that's 6, but we know there's only 4 corners. So we said, well, 2 of them are repeated to tell me that it's ma'akiv if you don't do it. So it's really 4, but 2 of those 4 are repeated. Then we said, what does Beis Hillel do? Beis Hillel says that they learn from the way that it's spelled, not the way that it's pronounced. Kronis. It's really, I should read it. Karnais, kronis, which means 1 + 1 + 2. That's a total of 4. 3 of them for the mitzvah, and 1 of them is ma'ak. 1 of them is essential. He said maybe they're all for the mitzvah. He says no, it's impossible. You can't. Mitzvah means that it's just extra, but not essential. So we said it can't be that there's no application of blood. How do you get the atonement without any application? It has to be 1 there, and so therefore 1 is considered repeated. So it's essential. Maybe, okay, so now we said Iba Yasema. Iba Yasema, as Beis Hillel learns from a combination of the written, the way it's pronounced, and the way that it's written. The way that it's pronounced, I have 3 plurals, which is a total of 6. The way that it's written, I have a total of 4. I have 1 plural and 2 singular. So it's a total of 4. So what do? We use the plural pronunciation to add, and we use the text to detract, which leaves us with 1 extra. 5. Okay, so that's going to be 1 extra. That's going to be 4, which are 3 which are mitzvah, and 1 which is doubled, which will be la'akiv, which will be essential. Okay, so now this is where we're holding. We say elameyata, if that's the case, that every time you have a Kri and Ksiv, you have a Mikra and Mesiras. You have the reading of the text, and you have the traditional Mesoratic text, that you're going to do a combination of both, and you're going to just do somewhere in the middle. If that's the case. So if that's the case, then L'taitafais. It's Taitafais is the word that's used for the tefillin, the frontlets. So the first 2 times it's mentioned in singular. And then 1 time it's mentioned in plural, which is a total of 4. However, if you want to do the way that it's read, it's going to be 6, because you read it L'taitafais. You don't read it L'taitafes. You read it L'taitafais, which is a plural. So it's 6. Now, Harikan Arba, really it's 4 if it's the way that it's written. But you really should have to make 5 boxes in the tefillin, because we do a combination, according to Beis Hillel, of the text versus the way that it's read. When it says Savalak Rabbi Kiva, we're not using the fact that we have 4 boxes. We're not getting that from the amount of times it says Taitafais. We're learning different. We're learning like Rabbi Akiva. This is a Gemara Rosh Hashanah, I think. It says Damar Tat Bekas Vishtayim Pas Bafrik Ishtayim. Says that take the word Tat Taitafais and you divide it up. in Caspian, tat means two. And then the pais in Afrikaans means two. Just look this up on Google Translate. And what's 2 plus 2 is 4. So where do we get the 4 boxes of the tefillin? That we get it from the translation of the two halves of the word, not because it says a bunch of times in the Torah. Elameata, okay, let's continue this. If you want to say that you do a combination of the Kri and the Ksiv, of the Mikra and the Maseches, then basukais. How do we know that you have that a sukkah needs to have 4 walls or 3 walls or 2.5 walls? How do you know that? Because it says basukais. It says if you read it the way it's written, then it would be only a total of 4. If you read it the way that it's pronounced, then there would be a total of 6. So hani mikra v'hani maseches chamisha dafnaisa by the mavid. You should really have 5 walls for a sukkah. Make it a pentagon sukkahs. So the Gemara says hasam chad kra kul gufei. No. One pasuk is entirely extra. Not entirely extra. Is not extra at all. You can't learn from it at all because it needed to say once in the Torah sukkais, or else we don't know what we're talking about. And, so therefore, one of them we can't learn from. So if you subtract 1, and it's written 3 times, and you subtract 1, then you're left with only 4, even though it's a total of 6. If you're looking at the way that it's pronounced, it's a total of 6. But when you subtract 1, you end up subtracting 2, because each one is a plural. So you subtract 1 plural, you're left with 4. And then chad l'schacha. One of them tells me that I need to have schach. Basi hilchasa, and then I have halacha l'moshe misina. How many walls do I have left? I have 3. V'garsa l'shlishas v'kma tefach. It reduces the 3rd wall and says that the 3rd wall only needs to be a tefach. Like we learned in Masech the Sukkah, that a sukkah possibly only needs 2 walls plus a tefach. Elameyata, the Gemara is continuing the same logic. You want to say that you do a combination of both, right? The Mikra and the Maseches, the written text and the reading, and the way it's pronounced. It says v'tama shvu'ayim. A woman that gives birth to a girl, tummy for 14 days, 2 weeks. Now, if you look at the text, it doesn't say shvu'ayim, it says shivim, because there's no vav in there. Now, we read it shvu'ayim, but it really says shivim. Now, shivim means 70. What's the difference between 14 and 70? Is 56. Right? Subtract 10 would be 60. Another 4 would be 56. So the difference is 56. Now, if we do a combination between the two, the way it's written and the way it's read, then I'm going to have to do half of 56, because that's the difference between the 70 and the 2 weeks. The way it's written is 70. The way it's read is 2 weeks. What's the difference? 56. I have to divide 56 in half, which is 28. Now I have to take 28 and add it on to the 14, because we have the 14. So I would be left with 42. So the Gemara says like this: we should join the pasuk, and we should join we should use the way it's read, and we should use the way it's written. She should be tummy for only 42 days, not for a total of 42 days. This would be an increase. She's only tummy for 2 weeks. We should make it into 42 if we're going to do a combination. Over there, you can't do that, because the difference between shvu'ayim and shivim is not just the difference in number. Shvu'ayim is 2 weeks. It's not how many days. It's not 14 days. It's 2 weeks. Shivim is a number of days. And it's because I know that it says kini dasa, like a woman that's a nida, and a nida is tummy for 1 week. So I know that shvu'ayim is not talking about days; it's talking about weeks. So I know that it's talking about weeks. So you can't do over there this combination of both the reading and this, because it says clearly kini dasa, which is just 1 week. The Tana Ma'aseh Mahacha. Now the Gemara says that when we had a machlekes in the Mishnah between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, how many applications of blood are essential, we actually have another source for it. Rav Huna attempted to give a source. I'm not sure why we're rejecting Rav Huna if we just worked it all out. Whatever the case is, our Gemara says that we have another source. It says v'kiper, v'kiper, v'kiper. It says a bunch of times in the Psukim by the Karban Chatas. There's different types of Karban Chatas. One is by the Nasi. One is by the goat. And one is by the sheep. It says v'kiper. King does a sin, or if you bring the other types of Karban Chatas. So then it says v'kiper by each one. A keeper means an atonement. Mipnei hadin. And because it's necessary to say this. Why? Sheyachal, because I could have thought for leidinu. It should be logical. Nemra damim lamata v'nemra damim lamayla. It says about application of blood that's done below the red line on the altar, which is referring to all sacrifices, all animal sacrifices, except for the Karban Chatas and the Oila Sa'if, which are put above the line. It says Nemra damim lamata v'nemra damim lamayla. It says the blood that's applied below the line, and it says the blood that's applied above the line. Just like by those sacrifices, the blood that's placed below the line, one application of blood is satisfactory. So too, blood that's applied above, that if it's placed one application, it's already satisfactory. So we learn from a precedent from what does that have to do with keeper? We'll see in a minute. We'll see soon. Or perhaps the way that you're learning is not correct. Go away from this path. You're looking for a precedent. I come up with another precedent that's going to be totally different. It says that the blood is applied for sacrifices that enter into the sanctuary. There's a special chatais. It's called chatas apnimis. And there's also chatas chitzainus. And when it comes to the chatas pnimis, we know that even one missing application of blood would disqualify the sacrifice. So now we have two ways of looking at this. Do we compare it to the blood that's placed below the middle, the hemisphere, the lower hemisphere of the altar, or do we compare it to the blood that's brought inside the sanctuary? If you compare it to the one that's below the hemisphere, then even one application would be satisfactory. Compared to what's going inside, then if you're even missing one, is not going to be satisfactory. So which one do we compare it to? If you're lacking one of the application of blood, then you did nothing. So then, if you're the blood that's applied, if you want to compare it to the one inside, so then missing one application of blood, then the whole sacrifice is invalid. Near Lemidaim, let's see, which one should we compare it to? Karban Chatas. Should we compare it to the Karban Shlamim, or the Asham? Or we should compare it to a Chatas that's brought inside the sanctuary? Which one? So, Danan Chutz Michutz, Ve'in Danan Chutz Mibifnim. If this is done outside the sanctuary, then we should compare the Karban Chatas to other ones that are done outside the sanctuary, which would mean that you only need to have one application of blood for it to be satisfactory. Oh, Yikalchal, so maybe not. Maybe we should go the other way. We say, Danim Chatas v'arba karanis, mechatas v'arba karanis. You should do something that's called the carbon chatas, and we should compare it to another carbon chatas, which that's brought inside the sanctuary, and which is applied to four corners, which that's talking about the inner altar. And we'll compare what's applied, the chatas on the inner altar to a chatas on the outer altar. It's called the chatas, and there's four corners. The application of the blood was on four corners. And don't prove from sacrifices that are brought outside the sanctuary. Chain chatas rabakanas, they're not even called the chatas, and they don't have the application of four corners. So there's no comparison. So we have two options here. Should we compare it to things that are done outside, and this is also done outside, or we should compare it to a chatas in four corners, which is inside, and even though this one is outside. So Talmud Laimar, so that's why the pasuk comes along and says, "V'kiper, v'kiper, v'kiper." It says three times to teach me which one to go. What does it tell me? It says v'kiper, one v'kiper. The first keeper is afal pishlei nasan el shalish, that you don't even if you didn't do all four, but it's still considered an atonement if you only did three. The next keeper tells me afal pishlei nasan el shtayim, still an atonement even if you didn't do three. It's still an atonement if you did two. The keeper afal pishlei nasan el achas, still an atonement if you didn't do two, even if you just did one. So the keeper is coming to diminish how many times you have to apply it. It says you have to apply it 4 times on each of the corners. Comes along the keeper and tells me that even if it was applied one less, which leaves us with one, that would be essential, that would be fine. I called it corners. I call it horns. That's awesome. The Hebrew word keren is the English word corner, but keren is corner, right? But another translation of it is horn. Keren could be a horn, and which the corner, the upper corner of the altar, which is called the keren, in the art scroll, the Hill is telling me they're translating it as horns. So why? Well, that's the way they translation of keren. There's different ways of translating. I was translating once. I said malachim. I said angels. So us angels. Malachim, not angels. Angels is something else. Angels is some things you have to say in Hebrew. You can say it in English. Okay, so the Gemara now asks, "What are you telling me that the word bekiper?" I'm on 38a. What are you telling me that the word bekiper is coming to teach? Keeper means atonement. It's or cleansing. That is coming to teach me that you don't need to do all 4 applications. Even if you do only one, it's still essential. The only one is essential. The rest are just extra for the mitzvah. So then, but the problem is that the word bekeeper needs to say bekeeper to tell me that there's an atonement. So it's not those 3 bekeepers are not extra. Amar Rava Barada Mari Asbrili. Rava Barada says that Mari explained it to me. Amar Krava Keeper Benisla. It has 2 versions. Want to go learn in the sukkah? So they say when you're hot, you should drink a tea. So we're saying now that it says v'kiper v'nislach, atone and forgive. Nislach, forgive. So zui kapar zui slach, it's the same thing. So once we said the word v'nislach, then we really don't need the word v'kiper. Okay. Correct the Gemara. Gemara asks, "Ema v'kiper af bishlei nasan ela shalish lamayla v'achas lamata." V'kiper af bishlei nasan ela shtayim lamata shtayim lamayla. V'kiper af bishlei nasan lamayla ela lamata. How do you know? The application of the blood has to be on the upper part of the altar, right? Because we're talking about you putting it on the horns, the corners. And we're saying we're diminishing one application. Maybe the word v'keeper, which is telling me it's atonement, even if you didn't do it, right? It's nevertheless an atonement. Maybe it's not telling me that you can actually skip an entire application of blood. Maybe it's coming to tell me that if you didn't do it correctly, if you did, instead of doing it on top, you did it on bottom. Let's do that again. Maybe the keeper is coming to tell me if you didn't do all 4 on top, you did only 3 on top and 1 below. The keeper, the next one, it says 3 times 2. Next, the keeper would be telling me that even if you did, should have said even if you did 2 above and 2 below. The keeper, even if you did all 4 of them below. But you didn't skip any, you just did it in the wrong place. If that's the case, that you're going to skip all 4 on the corner, then you're neglecting what the Torah says that you have to put it on the corners. So the Gemara asks on Ravada Bar Yitzchak. Ravada Bar Yitzchak's question is saying you can't learn it like that because then you're left with nothing. So you ask on him, they say, but so what? So what if you're left with nothing? If the Torah tells me that that's what you have to do, then that's what you have to do. Or if the Torah tells me that it's satisfactory, then it would be satisfactory. You're not. You don't have to do anything more than what the Torah says, right? Sometimes people take this too serious. You know, Chayla on Yom Kippur or on Shabbos or something. Someone that's ill says, "No, I'm gonna fast anyway. I'm not gonna violate Shabbos." Say, "Hey, who said you have to keep Yom Kippur? The Eibishter. Who said you have to keep Shabbos? The Eibishter. So you don't have to be stricter than the Eibishter. He's the one that tells you that this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do. It's the same law." Right? So you were saying over here, it said 1 second, but you're going to miss the whole law. It says, yeah, but this is what we're learning from the pasuk, that this is actually perfectly fine if you'd miss it. Rava says, Eizu davar, which have to answer up. How do we know that you don't need all 4 applications? That even one is essential. Eizu davar shetzarich shalish. We only have 3 keepers. What could possibly be the number 3? This must be the corners. Now, if what it's really telling you is that you can do the application of the blood below the line on the bottom of the altar, then it shouldn't tell me the number 3. It should tell me something that has the number 4 in it, because the 4 applications of the blood that are above are now being done below. If you're telling me number 3, then you're really telling me that 3 of them are not essential, and one of them is. I have 4 corners. You're trying to tell me that 1 is essential. So then the number 3 is what's the number that we're using? Taking off. It's removing each one of the 3 corners. If it tells me that I really need all 4 corners, it just doesn't need to be on top, then it should say 4 times. What's the number? Where can I apply the number 3? Only if I'm saying that 1 out of the 4 is essential and the other 3 are not. I'm going to ask, maybe the keeper is coming to tell me that even if you only did 1 above, but you still have to do all 3 below. In other words, you can't get rid of 3 applications of the blood. We're just saying that it doesn't have to be in the right place. Maybe one needs to be on top, and 3 of them could be below, and then we could use the number 3. It says, you're creating something that we don't have any precedent for. We don't have any sacrifices where half the blood is put above the line and half the blood is put below the line. It says, you don't have that. But Tanan, we have a Mishnah. It says, it says that in a few places, One of them is on by the dam of Yom Kippur, by the blood of the bull on Yom Kippur. It says that he has to sprinkle once above and 7 below. So you see, some of them you put on top and some you put below. So it says, no, you're not understanding that, right? That's kamatzler. That's like a whip. My kamasov, what's a whip? Machmi Rabbi Yehuda kimenagdana, like a whip. Is that how they translate kimenagdana, like a whip? Which means it's not telling me where to apply the blood. It's telling me the way that it's sprinkled. If I want to put the blood lower down, then I do it overhand. If I want to do it above, then I do it underhand. Underhand throws it up. So the way that I'm using the finger is once above, which means once it's going to go downward, but I do it like overhand. And then 7 are lamata, which means underhand. Okay. But it doesn't actually matter where on the altar it goes. Okay. So we don't have a source for that. It says, he's a altare shel mizbeach sheva pa'amim. It says he should sprinkle it on the taharai. Taharai means purity. On the purity of the altar 7 times. What does the purity mean? My love. We're thinking that taharai means, my love, apalga de mizbeach. That means that you should put it at the center of the altar. Now, kadamri inshi tar tira the yama. What does tar mean? It means the afternoon. We have an expression where tar means the afternoon. Afternoon means the middle of the day. Middle of the day means, so tar. What's the tar of the mizbeach? Would be the middle of the altar. Middle of the altar. If you sprinkle in the middle of the altar, means some of them is going to go above, some is going to go below. Which means that we do have some times where the application is partially above, partially below. In the beginning of Maseches Brachos, I thought tahar meant, when it says tar yaima, I thought it meant that the day was cleared away. I didn't think it meant the afternoon. I thought it meant was the evening. Let's see what this is. It's interesting. It's the brightest. Okay. My answer is Amar Rava Bar Shila Loi. That's not the pshat. A tira of the mizbeach doesn't mean in the center of the side of the altar. Agiluya, it's talking about the top of the altar. The ksiv ketzem hashmayim l'tayar. It says like the essence of the heaven in purity, which is referring to the top or above. Now, why is it called tayar when it's above? Because there's ashes on the top, and when you sprinkle the blood, you have to sweep the ashes to the side. So that sweeping to the side means the purity, the clean part of the altar. As you sweep it to the side. Okay, now it says Va'ika Shirayim. What are you telling me? That you never have applications of the blood above, and in the same sacrifice you have the applications of the blood below, and then you never have that combination of that blood going above and going below. It's not true, because every sacrifice, if the blood is put above, you have the remainder of the blood that's poured on the foundation of the altar. Gemara says shirayim lemakvi; those are not essential. The remainder of the blood is not essential. Because shirayim pnimim. But what about the sacrifices that are brought inside the sanctuary? Where over there we do say that the spilling of the blood, the remainder of the blood on the outer altar, is essential. So it says the mandam the makpi, and we have an opinion that holds that would invalidate the sacrifice if it wasn't poured on the outer altar on the foundation. It says b'chad makim kamrinan. When we said that you don't have on one altar on the altar that it's placed above the middle and it's placed also below the middle, that would only be a concern if it would be one altar. But you're telling me we have to pour the blood, the remainder of the blood, and that's essential. That's talking about where the application of the blood was done on the inner altar. The pouring the remainder of the blood is done on the outer altar. And so the fact that one of them is above and one's below, it's not even the same altar. It's not significant. Talking about, do you have an application of blood on one altar where it has to go above and below? That we don't have on the same altar. Okay. Tanya starting a brisa. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Eimer. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov said, did we clarify everything here? Yeah, what were we looking for? We're looking for before this, we're looking for a source where you only need one application of blood, according to Beis Hillel, for the sacrifice to be, the chatas, to be valid. And Rav Huna gave us some sources before. Then comes along this other source where we learned from Bekeeper. Only question was, maybe Bekeeper was telling me something else, so we got rid of that by saying that we never find that the application of the blood is put above and below. Rather, what it means is that even if you don't do the three applications, you only do one application, it's still going to be valid. That was the discussion. Okay, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, Bishama Yaimrim, that there's machlekes. Bishama says, Shtei matanis shebechatas, v'achas shebechol hazvachim, matiris umefagles. Two applications of blood by the korban chatas and one application of blood by all other sacrifices allows the limbs or the organs of the sacrifice to be burnt on the altar and allows the flesh to be eaten. That's the pshat matiris. Matiris means it's it allows the sacrifice to be eaten and consumed by the altar.
So is this saying that one avoda is necessary for another avoda? Is that what it just said? The words?
Yeah. In order to bring the organs on the altar, first you have to sprinkle the blood. Now, how many applications of blood? He said 2. That's Beishami's opinion by the korban chatas. The second part of this is that in order for it to become pigul, you have to have 2 applications of blood, and in both of them you have to have the thoughts of pigul, which is out of the allotted time. But if it was one of them, then it wouldn't make it pigul. Now, Beis Hillel say those 2 halachas of allowing it to be for the sacrifice to be eaten or put on the altar, and the halacha of pigul all takes place with even one application of blood. Maskefla Rav Aisha has a question. If one application of blood can make it pigul according to Beis Hillel, but it won't become pigul according to Beis Shammai unless you have 2 applications of blood with thoughts of pigul. So who's stricter? Beis Hillel is stricter. It says if so, l'snai gabi kula Beis Shammai b'chumra Beis Hillel. We have a whole section in Maseches Zavachim where it has a list of all the times where Beis Shammai is more strict over Beis Hillel. And here we have another case where Beis Shammai is more strict. Where Beis Shammai is more lenient over Beis Hillel. And here we have another case where Beis Shammai is lenient. Why? Because Beis Shammai says that it doesn't become pigul unless you do it twice, unless you do 2 applications. And Beis Hillel says, no, it will become pigul even with 1 application. That means Beis Hillel is stricter. So why is this not listed in the list of machlekes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel where Beis Shammai is going to be lenient? Mary answers, Amalei Rava responds to Rabbi Ishia, we actually have 2 laws that are coming out of this machlekes. One is that the meat is allowed to be eaten, and the other one is that it becomes pigul. So we can view it like this. On one hand, for the meat to be eaten, it only takes 1 application. That's the opinion of Beis Hillel. The Beis Hillel is being more lenient. It only takes 1 application. You can eat the meat. On the other hand, for it to become pigul, it's going to, with only one, is going to be a strict. Beis Hillel is going to be stricter. So there's two laws here. One makes Beis Hillel stricter, one makes Beis Hillel more lenient. So how was the question posed originally? And that's going to tell us, is this going to be a law that goes under the strictness or it goes under the leniency? What we did was, that what Rava says is that when this question was originally asked, it was asked about the sacrifice being permitted, which means that Beis Hillel is going to be lenient. They hold that it becomes permitted even with one. Sure, they added in another detail there, which makes Beis Hillel stricter, but that's not the main context of what that machlekes was. The main context of that machlekes was where Beis Hillel is lenient and Beis Shammai is strict, and so therefore it wasn't put into the list of Mishnayos and Idias, where you have all those anomalies of Beis Shammai being lenient. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Shalosh matana shebechatas ein bayis balayla." We said that only one application of blood by the korban chatas is essential. The other ones are not essential. So, although they're not essential, but they still have some restrictions. You can't apply them at night, Rabbi Yochanan says. However, if the owner of the sacrifice passed away after the first application of blood, but you still have another 3 to do for the mitzvah, not for essentially, but for the mitzvah, you're still allowed to apply the blood, even though the owner has passed away. And if someone takes them outside of the temple, and he puts the blood on some other altar outside the temple, you're not allowed to do that. That's called the shchuti chutz. So then he's going to be chayev, even though these applications are not essential. Nevertheless, it's still considered blood of a sacrifice which is being applied to somewhere where it's not supposed to be. Amar Rav Papa now says, Yesh mem kitchilas v'yesh mem keseifa. You see, these 3 applications of blood, they have a similarity to the first application of blood, which is essential. They also have a similarity to the remainder of the blood, which is not essential. So this, in the middle, we have like 3 categories here. You have the first application of blood, that's the essential. Without that, the sacrifice is not permitted. Then you have 3 more applications of blood to the corners, that's a mitzvah to do. And then you also have the remainder of the blood, which is poured on the foundation. So this middle level of these 3 applications of blood, in a way, are similar to the first application, and in other ways, they're similar to the remainder of the blood. Let's take a look. This is Rav Papa saying. Some aspects are similar to the original application of blood. Some aspects are similar to seifai, to the end, which means the remainder of blood. It goes like this. Chutz, if these 3 applications are taken outside the temple, B'layla, or if they want to do them at night, or zares, or if a non-Kohen is going to decide to put them on, the klisharis, or they're going to be taken from a vessel, and it needs to be in a holy vessel. Keren, the application needs to be on the corner. Be'etzba, it has to use the finger. Kibus, if from these 3 applications of blood, which are not essential, it drips onto the Kohen's clothing, it has to be washed in the holy places. Has to be washed, right? That's the halacha of blood drips on the clothing. It has to be washed out. B'shirayim, and this is the halacha that if the blood was received in 4 different cups, one application was given from each of those cups, so the rest of the cup, each one of those rest of the cups is all considered shirayim and has to be poured out. Now onto the foundation. Now, what we're saying now is that even though only one of those applications was really essential, but the other 3 also create shirayim. If you used 1 cup, then you won't be able to tell that they actually create shirayim, because when you apply the blood from the first one, then it's automatically all shirayim. Even if you do the second, third, that's not going to change anything. Here we're saying that you had different cups for each of the 4 applications, and only the first one is going to be relevant. So is essential, But so maybe only the first one has shirayim. The first one has what's considered the remainder of the blood if it needs to be part. We say no, all of them create shirayim. All 4 cups create shirayim, even though they're not essentially they don't affect the validity of the sacrifice. Okay, now all of those are kitchilasan. All of those halachas compare it to the first application of blood. Misa leishayav lemafalga, if the owner dies, or are you allowed to eat the meat, or can you make without it, or can it make piggle? Leishayav lemafalga le'ayla legavai, in it, or it wasn't brought inside. No, not it wasn't brought. You're not allowed to bring it inside. But it doesn't affect the validity. There's a rule that a carbon chatas that's not supposed to be inside the sanctuary, which is the typical chatas, although there are some that are, but the typical chatas is not brought inside the sanctuary. But if you do bring the blood inside the sanctuary,
That's why.
if you do bring it inside the sanctuary, it invalidates the carbon chatas. But that's only if you bring the first application of blood inside the sanctuary. Once you already brought one application of blood in the sanctuary, and then you try to bring, and then you bring from the other 3 applications, it doesn't invalidate the sacrifice. So this is similar to the seifan, the shirayim. Remember we said that these 3 applications, in some ways, are similar to the first application. Some ways they're similar to the remainder of the blood. Here it's similar to the remainder of the blood. One of the things that we mentioned here, I want to add it up. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 versus 1, 2, 3, 4. In 8 ways, it's similar to the first application of blood. In 4 ways, it's similar to the remainder. All right, whatever. That's not well. One of the things that we mentioned is that if the 3 applications of blood, which are not essential, dripped on the Kohen's clothing, he has to wash them. How do we know that you have to wash it off? That's not the real blood. The real blood was just the first application. How do you know it needs to be cleansed? It needs to be washed off, laundered. The Gemara says like this. The Tanan, this is Papa. Papa brings a source. We learned in the Mishnah. Says nitas minat savra ala beged. If the blood spritches from the neck of the animal onto clothing, einatan kibus, it doesn't need to be washed off. It only if it spritches from the vessel, not if it spritches from the neck itself. Spritzes, what did I say? Spritzes. Spritzes in English. Spritzes is either.
No, spritzes is spritz.
Okay. So, mina keren, mina yisoid, enetan kibas. If it comes off the corner after it's been applied, or if it comes off the foundation after it's been poured, because you poured on the foundation for the remainder, enetan kibas. It doesn't need to be washed off. Only if it comes before it's applied. If it comes on the clothing, then it needs to be cleansed. By kaparas, when you come back, you take a look at your shirt. You had no recollection of this, but you see red dots on your shirt from the shechita. That's the. It just gets on you somehow. You don't even know how this thing is like flapping around, and yeah. By in Hilchos Nida, say Avra b'shuk shel tabachim. The woman went by shlachtais, and then she finds like a red stain on something, and she's tahar, because it probably came from there, even though she didn't know when it happened. But when you walk through those places, you end up with dots on you. Yeah.
Why can't we learn this? Floors were full of blood, but they wore boots so that their garments were.
No, they didn't wear boots. Barefoot.
Now they're constantly moving. They had boots. Or they were passing boots.
No, we said that it was.
Hmm.
Okay, don't worry
I'm
about
just
it.
telling you, because when I reviewed it.
I think
he
the
had-
AI. I think
he
the
had
AI.
guys passing
I think the
boots.
AI put boots in. We said there was no.
Okay, so then you can't learn from it.
I asked about it because I thought maybe a little more boots.
There were galoshes.
Gotta
Okay,
go back and check out it.
so they said that there was this one teacher that was a sheikhet. So after he did the shechit, he would come to he would take a shower and he would come to to teach. They shech usually in the morning, like 4 a.m. is when the shechita starts, and then it came to school ring. But anyway, when everything was clean, everything was fine. But when you looked at his glasses, there was like on the rim of his glasses that you forget to wash that. Always red dots on the. Okay, so what we're learning now is that if it spritzes from the 3 applications onto his clothing, it has to be washed. And Rav Papa is saying, where do we know this from? Because we have a Mishnah that says that from the neck, you don't have to wash it. From the corner or from the foundation, after it's been applied, you don't have to wash it. But Mina Royal Karen, what is fit to be put on the corner, not what was already on the corner, what's fit, what's eligible to be put on the corner, Ton Kibas. It doesn't, you do need to wash it off. See, those 3 applications, even though they're not essential, but they are eligible to be placed on the corner, right? That's the mitzvah, is to put them on the corner, on the horns. So then it still needs to be washed. That's a good source. When it asks, according to your logic, but you're saying that once it's put on the corner, not, but eligible for the corner, yes. So mina yisoid, from the foundation, einaton kibus. It doesn't need to be washed. Hamina rayli yisoid. But after the applications have been done, and it's eligible to go on the foundation, ton kibus, then you're going to have to wash it. Once applications are done, you don't have to wash it. If you're going to take your logic, where you're going to take what it says and imply that one step prior to that is going to require laundering, so then you're going to have come out with a halacha that's not actually accurate. So before it's put on the corner, you want to say on the corner. Once it's on the corner, you don't have to wash it. But before you put it on the corner, eligible for the corner, you do have to wash it. So the same thing as would be the foundation. Once it's in the on the foundation, you don't have to. But eligible for the foundation, you do have to. It's going to come out, the halacha. It's not accurate that after the application of the blood's already been done, the blood that you're going to pour as the remainder onto the corner, you're going to have to wash it off the clothing if it gets on the clothing. And that's not accurate. So the Gemara says, Asher yaza ksiv, prat lazek shvar huza. Only what's sprinkled, not something that's been sprinkled already. Once the blood's been sprinkled, you don't have to do the laundry. You don't have to wash it off the clothing. I mean, what do you do with it? You don't have that special halach of washing it in the holies, in the temple. Hamani Reb Nechemia. The Gemara says no. We're actually learning from Reb Nechemia. Now, what's happening here is we have a different source. That source is the Tanan. We're going to say that this is going according to a different source. The Tanan, it was taught in the Mishnah. Reb Nechemia holds that the remainder of the blood is considered the actual blood, and therefore, according to Reb Nechemia, you would have to do the laundry. Before it's been poured. No, after it's been poured, not only before. No. The Gemara says, "Ema the shamatle Reb Nechemia lin hala idavi avarim b'pedarim lin kivus mishamatle." You're quoting Reb Nechemia and you're applying to his statement things that he never actually said. All Reb Nechemia said was that if someone were to take the blood after it's been applied, the remainder of the blood, and bring it outside the temple, and apply it to some altar outside the temple, that would be considered a violation of applying the blood outside the temple, even though the blood's already been applied and this blood is just the remainder. But he says the remainder of blood is considered blood, and it would be a violation. It would be chayiv. shchitas chutz, for bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. He said, but that's only because we're comparing it to taking the limbs or the organs outside the temple and putting it on an altar. But linyan kibbutz, but regarding doing laundry, where do you have to launder the clothing that the blood got on? Rebbe Nechemia never mentioned nishamatli. The Gemara says he actually did say. V'hatanya, we even have a brayse this v'hatanya. Rashi says it's benichusa. Usually the word baha could be translated as this, or it could be translated as but. So if it's v'hatanya, but we learned in a brayse, then it's a question. But sometimes it could be v'hatanya, and this is actually what we learned in the brayse, which means it's a proof. Rashi always tells us if it's a question or a proof. He doesn't tell us when it's a question because it's typical for it to be a question. But when it's a proof, he'll tell us that. V'hatanya is benichusa. It's said as a statement. It says, damim hanitu'unim yisaid. Blood that requires to be poured onto the foundation. What type of blood is that? That means that the application of the blood was already done on the altar, and this is the remainder of the blood. Tu'unim kibbutz requires to be laundered. Umachshava mayalasbem. And thoughts of pigul on this blood is actually going to turn into pigul. We're going to have to see later how, because usually we don't say that. Usually we say that only the application of the blood on the corners can make pigul. But here, the pouring of the blood onto the foundation is a big surprise. But whatever the case is, we learned from this that the blood, the remainder of the blood, could cause the halacha of kibbutz, where if it gets onto someone's garment, they have to launder it.
Is this the leftover that's going in the 2 holes?
Yeah.
By the way, he's not probably definitely wrong with this.
Not a contradiction. First he said blood is nothing, and then now they say
It's a different opinion. It's from the Chemia. And if someone takes the blood outside the temple and applies it to an altar outside the temple, he's chayev. That's a violation. However, if the blood became invalid, and instead of pouring it onto the foundation of the altar, instead it's poured into the drain. In the temple, there was a drain called the Amma. It was a drain a stream that flowed. Had flown. flowed through the temple, and that was considered the drain. So if blood that was invalid,
drained. They're drained.
Yeah, but you had to get it in there, so it had to flow in and then drain out, right? You don't drain it in.
Drained.
So
is this whole subject about dam nefesh?
that's the basis. That's the blood that we're getting has to be the dam nefesh.
But none of
That's
this
what we're talking about way after that.
this discussion now is not dam nefesh. It's dam. What's it called? The dam of the flesh. It comes out afterward. Is that right?
No, because there is something called dam tamtzis or dam ivarim or all of those things.
Right.
But all of that has to do with where we got the blood into the vessel originally. How did we know which blood were we getting originally?
Okay.
We already got the right blood. We got the dam nefesh. That's the blood that spritzes out at the slaughtering. Now he has that blood, and he already applied it to the altar. He has the correct blood. That's the dam nefesh. And now it's getting onto his clothing. The question is, does he have to launder? There's special halachas of laundering the clothing. If there's the blood that's supposed to be applied on the altar, it ends up on his clothing. So we're saying, well, let's say what we're really talking about now is after the blood has been applied the first time, and now it's the non-essential applications of blood is getting on his clothing. Does he have to launder that as well? So we're saying that according to Rebbe Nechemia, not only does he have to launder that, but even if it's the remainder of the blood, he would still have to launder it. So where does he say that? We said, well, we have a source. It says the blood that's put on the foundation needs to be laundered. And if someone takes that blood outside, it's chayiv. However, if it's poured into the amma, into the drain, that's because it became invalid. So that blood ain't tongue kibbutz, even according to Rebbe Nechemia. It doesn't need to be laundered. And of course, there's no pigul in that blood. It's just you're just pouring it in the drain. b'chutz, and if someone takes that blood outside the altar, outside the temple, then he's going to be pater. It's going to be exempt because that's not eligible to be applied anyway. It became invalid. So in order to finish our proof, we say man shamet le'damer malabem b'chutz chayav. Which opinion is it that tells us that taking the remainder of the blood outside the temple would actually be chayav if it's the remainder of the blood and you're applying it outside the temple? That's only Reb Nechemia. That's Reb Nechemia. Uka Amar, and Reb Nechemia himself says Ton Kibbus. Here and in this brisa, it says that Ton Kibbus. Now Reb Nechemia is a Tana. He's the author of this brisa. He's actually the author of the Tosefta. And so we have a proof that he is the one that says that it's Ton Kibbus, that it requires laundering, even though it's going on the foundation, even though it's the remainder of the blood. Now the Gemara goes back to analyze something that we said here, which was very surprising. It says, Machshava me'alaspem. It says that if someone has thoughts of pigul while he's pouring the remainder of the blood, it would invalidate the sacrifice. It says, Vatanya, but we have a brisa that says, Yotzu shirayim v'aktar simurm she'im akvenes hakapara, she'in machshava me'alaspem. It says clearly that the pouring the remainder of the blood is not essential, and burning the limbs is not essential. And the thoughts that a person had, that the kohen has when he's doing that, don't invalidate the sacrifice. The sacrifice was already valid when the blood was applied beforehand. It doesn't retroactively mess up while he's pouring the remainder. It doesn't go back and mess that up. The Gemara says, Kitanyahi, when was that brisa referring to when it said, Machshava mayelas behem, that's b'shalish matanesh shebechatas. That's talking about the 3 applications of blood, which do create pigul. The brisa that said that blood that's placed on the that's going to be poured on the foundation requires laundering, and thoughts affect it for pigul. That thoughts affected for pigul is referring to the 3 applications of blood. Right. We're saying now, according to Reb Nechemia, it would still invalidate it. Let's take a look. It says, Kitanye b'shal smatanish shebechatas. What did Rav Papa say? Puts Laila Zaras no, Leimefagla. He said clearly that it doesn't make pigul. Here we're saying that it does make pigul. If that's the case, that it's talking about Shalish Matanish Shebechatas, it's talking about those 3 applications, then why do you say it's talking about Yachi Tu'unim Yisaid Lekeren Asli? What do you mean Damim HaTu'unim Yisaid? The blood that's meant to be poured on the foundation. We're not talking about the blood that's meant to be poured on the foundation. We're talking about the blood that's meant to be put on the corners. If you're talking about the 3 applications, it has the wrong label. Ella, I'm sorry, it doesn't say Ella. It says Ema Nitanim Yisaid. Those that eventually will be put on the foundation. Not that they need to go right now on the foundation, but eventually it's going to go on the foundation, which is now referring to the 3 extra applications of blood that could create pigul. One asks, Machshava mayelas, that's going to create pigul. But we said before, Rav Papa says, Leishari, Leishayav lemafaglav le'ayla legavai keseifan. We said that those 3 applications, they don't permit the meat. It's the first one that permitted the meat. They don't make pigul, and if they're brought inside the temple, they don't invalidate the whole set. They run inside the sanctuary. They don't invalidate the entire chatas. Keseifan, as if they're shirayim. Gemara says, Ella kitanyahi. When did we say that they're considered like shirayim? When did we say rather that damim matu'inim? When did we say that machshava me'alaspem by the 3 applications of blood? We're not talking about blood from a sacrifice that's put on the outer altar. From the outer altar, talking about blood, it's meant to go on the inner altar. Over there, every application of blood is ma'akiv, is essential. And over there, we're going to say that those applications could create pigul. Really, we're talking about after the application was done. And we're really talking about the shirayim. We're really talking about the shirayim, not the applications of the blood. We're talking about that you're taking it outside. And now we can read damim hatunim yisayid, the blood that's meant to be put on the foundation. Not because eventually, but even right now you're putting it on the foundation. And nevertheless, that application, that pouring it on the foundation is also essential for sacrifices that go inside the sanctuary. So we have this big chiddush here that the blood that goes inside the sanctuary, even the shirayim, can create pigul. What's going to be with the blood that's put on the outer altar?
How can that be? What is the incorrect intention there?
If he's going to maybe burn the limbs outside of the allotted time.
But I thought we learned earlier, at least I thought I learned, that basically if anything is wrong, what happens subsequently cannot create pigul. Did I get that wrong?
Yeah, no, that's correct. Here, everything was done right, and he can still make it pigul when he's bringing the remainder of the blood to the outer altar to pour it on. This is by those unique sacrifices where the blood goes inside.
Is this concluding that pouring the blood on the outer altar or pouring it down the drain is part of the...
Yeah, but not down the drain. On the outer altar, on the foundation of the outer altar, is considered a service which could invalidate the entire sacrifice. Only by these special sacrifices where the blood is brought inside the sanctuary. This is like the Seirim and Esrafim, the Parvasar Shli Yom Kippurim, the Par Helam Davar, those special sacrifices. Yeah.
Does pigul stay by itself, or it combine?
What do you mean?
Or if anything else combine with pigul, it wouldn't be pigul.
Right, same thing here. Anything else that invalidated it wouldn't be pigul.
I'm losing the picture of the inner altar and the outer altar regarding Kodesh, Kodeshim, and Kodesh.
It doesn't have to do with that.
So
Most
where's the inner
sacrifice,
altar?
the inner altar is the altar that's in the sanctuary, which is used only for ketairos. Every once in a while, like on Yom Kippur, and if there was the entire congregation did a sin, and based on the psak of the Sanhedrin, they would have this special sacrifice where they would bring the blood actually into the inner altar and apply it.
Okay, so the inner altar is where you just
Really,
and where's the outer?
outer altar is in the courtyard, at a big ramp
But within the base.
in the basement of the shul.
And that's where they have many altars.
Yeah. No, they only had one altar.
They only, so where did they have many? Where they did many sacrifices?
Never.
Thousands of people bringing sacrifice. Wasn't it just that?
It was officially done on one altar, but when they did have that, there was a halacha that they were allowed to actually burn it on anywhere on the floor of the courtyard. Shlomo Melech, when he inaugurated the temple, he inaugurated also the floor because there were so many sacrifices. The Mizbeach couldn't contain all the sacrifices. Kings.
And then all that area, the Kohanim will be affected. It's
Yeah.
only outside of the basement. That maybe they take back the boots.
They would get hot if they're wearing, if they're burning sacrifices on the floor and they're barefoot. Okay. So, but now we're learning this interesting halacha about the blood that goes inside, the blood that's meant to go inside, that everything is ma'akiv on that, even the pouring it back on the remainder of the blood, and that could create pigul. So, now the Gemara says, "Aval b'dam chitzayin mai." What would be the halacha if it was an outer a chatas from an outer sacrifice? What would the halacha be? You'd be pater. You'd be exempt. Why is it using the word pater? I guess the conclusion was, if you bring it outside the temple and you offer it outside the temple, we said chayev. So he says that's only because why you chayev if you bring the remainder of the blood outside the temple and you apply it somewhere outside the temple? That's because that blood was meant to go in the sanctuary, and so therefore it's still considered blood, because even when you pour it on the base, it's still considered blood. On the foundation, it's still considered blood, and it could create piggles. So therefore, you bring it outside, you're going to be chayev. But if it was a type of sacrifice, but you never bring inside the sanctuary, it always stays on the outer altar. Then if you'd bring it outside the temple, you'd be pater. That's what you can imply from this. Gemara asks, "Adatani damim hanishpachim la'ama liflik v'lisni bedida." This is a specific type of logic that the Gemara does, called liflik v'lisni bedida. When we try to make a contrast between two things, so you try to make the contrast as close as possible to the original, right? They wanted to say, like, who can we count for a minyan? You want to say you can count over 13 men, over 13. You would say, okay, but 12 years old, no. You would try to make the contrast very close. You wouldn't say, but you can't count spiders and grasshoppers. And that's like, why are you jumping to there?
No spiders?
You have to count. You have to make the contrast as close as possible to what you're talking about, to what's almost comparable, and you make a contrast. So here, what we're saying is that we made a contrast in the Raisa between two types of blood. One type of blood where it's always considered blood, and that's because one type. The contrast was like this: the blood that's being put on the foundation versus the blood that's being poured down the drain. Blood that's being put on the foundation is still considered blood. Blood that's being poured down the drain is not considered blood. That was our contrast. But now what's coming out is that the blood that's being put on the foundation is really only the type of blood that's meant to go into the sanctuary, but not blood that's put on the outer altar. So the Gemara is asking, so if you wanted to make a contrast between blood that's put on the outer, that's poured on the foundation, versus blood that's poured down the drain, you should have done even something closer. You should have said blood that goes in the inner altar, which is now being put on the foundation, versus blood that goes in the outer altar, which is now being put on the foundation. You'd still have the same contrast, that one was going to be chayiv and one's going to be pater. Why do you have to take from blood that's being poured down the drain to get a pater? You have a much closer pater, much closer contrast, even with blood from the outer altar. It says, listening bedida. We could divide this up. When do we say that it's going to blood that's put on the foundation requires laundry. Requires laundry, and the blood and the thoughts are going to make it piggle, and it's going to be chayiv if you bring it outside. That's only bedamim papnimim. That's only in the inner altar. But if it's the blood from the outer altar, then you're going to be pater. You should have said that. If it's true, if it's accurate, then you should have had that contrast. My answer is Hamani Reb Nechemye. We're following the opinion of Reb Nechemye. Because even the blood from the outer altar is going to be chayev according to Reb Nechemye. And so therefore, because we had three halachas here, we wouldn't be able to say, to line all three up, that these three is in contrast to those three. We wouldn't be able to do that. We'd only be able to have two in contrast to two, and one of them would be the same. So therefore, we had to choose, in order to get all three symmetrical, that these are going to be chayev, these are going to be pater, we had to say these are going on the foundation and these are going down the drain. If we would have taken inner altar versus outer altar, we would only end up with 2 against 2, not 2 contrasted to 2. Because the outer altar, according to Reb Nechemye, even the blood that's being poured on the foundation, even if you take that outside the temple, that would still be even blood from the outer altar. But it's the remaining blood would be taken outside the temple, you'd still be chayav, it's still considered blood. So I wouldn't be able to use that as a contrast to blood from the inner altar, because the halacha is the same by both. Okay. That's why, because it was from Nechemya that holds that. So what comes out in the end is that thoughts of pigul on the remaining blood would not affect blood that's going on the outer altar, or kibus, on the remaining blood would not affect the outer altar. Blood from the outer altar would not require kibus either. It would not require laundry, because it's the remaining of blood. It's only the blood of the.
Whatever.
I think it
I
would
have
be
a
the.
problem.
I'm sorry.
I thought that it was because he touched the mizbeach with his begadim that got dirty from the blood that was touching the keren.
That you definitely don't need to, because that we have a pasuk that says min asher yazeh prat l'zeh shekvar huza, not what's already been sprinkled.
Right, so it's finished. But then you said there's shirayim after that, so that's how the chitzon or comes into play.
So I think Reb Nechemia still holds that the three last applications require kibbutz. Rav Papa says, like Rav Papa, that says.
Rav Papa says min ha keren, min ha yisoid.
Right.
So it's not the blood for the keren; it's after he did
Right.
it. So because I think Rashi says he finished the avodah.
No, that means the blood mina keren, you already don't need kibbutz. But if it's before it was put on the keren, then you would need kibbutz, which means that even the three applications would require kibbutz.
But you said after that, blood that's needed for something. Once you put it on, then what's it needed for? So they brought up chitz and stuff. Because you thought you finished.
So then we were trying to say that damim matu'unim yisaid, even the shiari adam, even the remaining blood, also would require kibbutz. We ended up saying that that's only by the inner sacrifices that are brought on the inner altar. Yeah. So where are we holding now? You won't be able to have 3 chiyuvim corresponding to 3 peturim, and so therefore we didn't put it like that. Okay, that was the conclusion of that Gemara. Ravina Amar, Ravina says, we mentioned before that we had a problem with Rav Papa. Rav Papa was saying that blood that's put, that's only after it's been applied to the corner, will you not require kibbutz. But before it's been applied to the corner, you would require kibbutz, even if it's the 3. We said if that's the way the logic that you want to use, then we should say also blood that's been put on the foundation doesn't require kibbutz. But before it's been put on the foundation, it would require kibbutz. And that's not true, because the remainder of the blood doesn't require kibbutz. And even if it hasn't been poured on the foundation. So we had to answer that it's Reb Nechemia. But Ravina says, he has a different shot. He says, Mina keren mamish, mina yisoid, mina royli yisoid. When you said from the corner, that means literally after it's been applied to the corner. But when you said from the foundation, it doesn't mean that's already on the foundation, which would imply that before it's put on the foundation, it requires kibbutz. Rather, when it says from the foundation, it means from the blood that's eligible for the foundation already doesn't need kibbutz. Yeah, so in other words, we're reading it in two different ways. The same phrase gets read in 2 different ways depending on what it's referring to. Min hakeren means once it's been on the keren, from the keren itself doesn't require kibbutz. Min hayisoid means not that it's already been on the foundation, but from what's eligible for the foundation. Maybe it's not like that. Maybe both of them are just eligible, but not that it's already been applied. There's even what's eligible for the corner should not require kibbutz. It says hi mai. This is how would this work? If you say that what's fit to be put on, we're talking about the 3 applications of blood that are fit to be put on the corner, you're going to say doesn't require laundry. So really, you say me by that, would it then have to say that what's eligible to be put on the foundation, the remaining of the blood, doesn't require kibbutz. You already told me that the 3 applications of blood already don't require kibbutz. Ela mina keren is mina keren mamish. Mina yisayid, mina re'eli yisayid. Okay, that's how the Gemara concludes. Now we say, anything that's put on the inner altar. In the Mishnah we learned, if you're missing one application, it's like you didn't do anything. Taner Rabbanan, we started in a brisa. It says, "V'asa kasher asa." It's talking about the par helam davar. Par helam davar, and we say like this: it should be done. V'asa kasher asa la par. You want to bring a chumash? It says you do for the par helam davar. Par helam davar is when the entire congregation does a sin based on a ruling of the Sanhedrin. It says you do to this one the same thing that we did to the other one. And the other one I think is the Nasi. Where's the verse? It's in Vayikra 4:20. V'asa lapar kasher asa lapar achatas kein yasalai. This means that he should do to this bull just as one does to the bull of the sin offering of the high priest, and not the Nasi, of the Kayin Mashiach. He should do exactly the same with it. Thus, the priest will make an atonement for them in the community, and they will be forgiven. Okay. Mabal lilmaid. What is this coming to teach us? Lichbal b'hazasi is coming to double the obligation to apply the blood. The limed, when anything when it comes to kachim, when anything is said twice, it says you should apply the blood, you should apply the blood. So that means that not only are you supposed to, but if you don't do it, it affects the validity. The second time you're saying it means that it's ma'akiv, it's essential. So because it says v'asa kasher asa, so you do to this, you did to that, which we already said, it's coming to tell us now, it's doubling it to tell me, if you're lacking one of the applications, then the whole thing is invalid. Maybe this is talking about because it says that you have to sprinkle the blood on the pareiches. It says that he sprinkles the blood, his finger in the, he dips his finger in, and he's 7 times on the pareiches. Maybe it's only that one. How do you know? Matan Dalid Minayan. How do you know it's referring to the application of blood to the 4 corners of the inner altar? Also, that's also Makav. Talmud Ken Yasa. It says so you should do, which is extra words coming to tell us the same thing applies to the 4 corners. Lapar. Well, if we go further in the pasuk, it says v'asa lapar kasher asa lapar hachatas. When it says lapar, it's coming to tell us also the par Yom Kippurim. The same law applies. That if you're missing one thing, it's going to be invalid. Kasher asa. Oh, so we were going through. The first of asa tells me that you have to do it. That's telling me that it's ma'akiv. Now we have lapar. Now it says kasher asa, as it was the kasher asa lapar. The par kayin Mashiach. This is referring to the bull of the kayin Mashiach. When he does a sin, he has to bring the special chatas, which is brought inside. Chatas. Now we have we're darshaning each word of the pasuk here. Elusir avedis chavim. This is referring to the goats of the avedis kechavim, which also need to be brought inside the sanctuary. Yeah. Yachal shani marba afsir regalim asir chadashim. Maybe I should also include the goats, the carbon chatas goats that are brought on the holidays or on Rosh Chodesh. Talmud Laimar loy. It says the word to him. Done to him, what's done? Kain yasalai, so it's done to him. That's an exclusion, it's coming out that. So why do you include all those other chatais and leave out these? The fact is, you do have an inclusion and an exclusion. So it says, I'm going to include the other sin offerings, and I'm going to leave out the going to leave out the Rosh Chodesh one. Shemachapern alaveras mitzvah yidua. Those are an atonement for a known prohibition. The korban chatas, which is brought on Rosh Chodesh, is when someone never knew that he was impure and went into the sanctuary. It atones that, so it's not a known sin. The other ones are for known sins. The chiper, afal sama. Then it says in the pasuk that it will be an atonement. Chiper aleim, there will be an atonement for them, even if they didn't do smicha. The chiper, as we said before, chiper tells me that there's an atonement even if there was no smicha. The nislach, and it's an atonement. Afal pishlei nasan shiraim, even if you didn't pour the remaining of the blood, it's still going to be an atonement. What made you say that it should be invalid if you didn't do the applications of the blood, but it's still going to be kosher if you didn't lean on the animal, or if you didn't pour the remaining of the blood? Amrit, we say will invalidate with the sprinkling of the blood because that's always essential. Because in every other place, it's not essential that the smicha be done. The sacrifice is still valid, even without the smicha, and even without pouring the remainder of the blood. Okay, let's leave this here.
Where exactly are you stopping?
Exactly at the bottom of Lamites Amud Beis. We're going to start tomorrow. Mem Amud Aleph Amar Ma at the top. 40.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good week.